The other day when we looked at different types of input, we looked at quite a few. We looked at text, email, password, number, but even the interesting ones that we looked at, like date and color and range, they all had one thing in common, which is that you were filling in one single field with one single answer, which is all well and good, but there are other more interesting types of input that we can look at that allow you to choose from multiple different answers or allow you to select multiple different answers at the same time, or sometimes there's no field for you to fill in at all. So we're going to have a look at some of these today, and the first one that we're going to look at is a radio button. So these circles here are called radio buttons, and the thing to know about the radio buttons is that I can only select one of the different options. So the way I've set it up here is I've given my input a type of radio, but unlike the inputs we've done before, I've got 3 different inputs that have all got the name fruit. And because they've all got the same name, I'm only allowed to select one of these options. And when I hit submit, it tells me that I've turned the fruit radio button on, which is not particularly useful. I want to know which of these 3 buttons I selected. And I can do that by giving each of my radio buttons a value. So now I have got 3 radio buttons. They've all got the name of fruit, so I'm only able to select one of them, but they've each got different values. So if I select apple and hit submit, then it says I've selected fruit equals apple. If I select banana and hit submit, it says fruit equals banana. So I've given all of them the same name, so I can only select one, and I've given each of them a different value. And that's how the radio buttons work. There's one extra thing to know about radio buttons, which is that right now they're very hard to click on because I have to click on this tiny little circle. But I can make them easier to click on by specifying what this label is pointing to. I can give my label an attribute of 4. And what I put in here between the speech marks is which radio button this label is supposed to be pointing to. So in this case, it's supposed to be pointing to this input field here. To find my input field, I have to give it an attribute called ID. So I'll call this input field apple option. Apple would do, but I'll call it apple option to make it very obvious that I'm writing the ID in here. Apple option. So now what has happened is that my label says that it is for an input that has the ID of apple option. I can do the same with my other ones. If I give this an ID of banana option, then I can say that the banana label is for the banana option. And the difference that has made is now I can click anywhere on the word apple, and because the browser knows that that's a label for this radio button, it selects that option for me. And I can click anywhere on the word banana, and it will select banana for me. It makes it much easier to click on the radio buttons. And because I haven't said what the orange label is for, if I click on the word orange, nothing happens. So I can use apple and banana, the words, to select the option. If I wanted that to work for orange as well, then I would have to give this label that says orange a for attribute and say orange option, and I'd have to give the orange input an ID of orange option. And now I've got nicely working radio buttons that are nice and easy to click on. I can only select one, and whichever one I select, that's the fruit that gets submitted to the page. The next type of input we're going to have a look at is a checkbox, and the checkbox looks almost exactly the same as the radio button. Here's a checkbox. The only real difference is that instead of circular options to select from, there are squares, and with the checkboxes I'm allowed to select as many or as few as I want at the same time. So perhaps a better question here is which fruits do you like, because it doesn't make sense anymore to ask for your favorite fruit. In this option, the checkbox input, I can select as many fruits as I want. And when I hit submit, you'll see it says fruit equals apple and fruit equals orange. Or if I select apple and banana, fruit equals apple and fruit equals banana. I can select as many options as I want to. If I leave them all blank, then nothing gets submitted to the page. Just like with radio buttons, if you don't have a value, then it will just submit the value on if you turn it on, which is quite useful sometimes. You just want to know if it's on or off. So that's checkboxes, almost exactly the same as radio buttons, but the type is checkbox, and you can select multiple at the same time. The third new type of input we're going to have a look at is a hidden type. And I'll show you the hidden type here. It's an input of type equals hidden, and nothing is showing up on the screen. It has a name and a value, which means when I submit it, it will put the name equals the value up the top here. So in this example, my name is secret and my value is open sesame. So when I hit submit, the page gets submitted with the option secret equals open sesame. You might be thinking to yourself, why on earth would you want to have an input that nobody can see and nobody can edit? Well, if you remember back to the last lesson, there are a lot of pages that will respond differently based on what you pass in the URL. And one of those includes form submit that we looked at in the last lesson. If you scroll all the way past the instructions and form submit, you'll eventually get to advanced features. And there are a whole bunch of extra input fields that you can add into form submit that will make form submit do special things for you. So you can change what page it goes to after you submit the form. You can change what subject it sends you when it sends you the email. You can make it also send the email to other people, which is CC. And you can get rid of the captcha if you want to. If you want to not force people to do a captcha step when they submit the form, you can add this input field type equals hidden, name is underscore captcha, and value is false. So this is a great example of why you would want to use a hidden input field. You don't actually want the person filling in your form to have any control over whether or not they see a captcha, but that's something that you as a developer want to have some control over. You want to be able to decide who the email gets CC'd to or what the subject is. This is a great example of where you want to submit extra information to the page that is hidden from the person filling out the form. So you can do that by using an input field of the type hidden. Okay, well that's it for the new input fields, but there are a couple of things you can add into forms that are not input fields at all. First one is a text area. It looks almost the same as an input field. It's a text area. Its name is fruit, but unlike the normal input field, you're allowed to do multiple lines. So I can type anything that I want into the text area. It also has a little resizing draggable corner in the corner of the text box. So text area is exactly the same as an input, except that you can ask people to fill in a few more words than you can in an input field. Sometimes it's nicer to have multiple rows in an input field. The main thing to notice about the text area is that you have to have a closing tag. So with input fields, if we go back to an input field for a second, you don't need to have a closing tag that says where the input finishes, because it's usually just some kind of button or box that gets put onto the page. But with text area, it can potentially have some content inside it. Content. And if I do that, nothing shows up on the page. I could have sworn that was supposed to put something inside the box. In that case, I don't know why exactly a text area needs to have a closing tag, but I just know for experience that you do have to have a closing tag on a text area. If I did not have this closing tag, it would think the whole rest of the page is inside the text area. As you can see here, my button has disappeared because my text area never finishes. So I put my closing tag on the text area, and now there's my submit button showing up there. So you do need a separate closing tag on the text area. I could have sworn I could write content in here. Content, content, it's not showing up. That's okay. Just know that you have to have a separate closing tag. Finally, there is a different option if you don't really like this radio button because it takes up too much screen space. If you had like 100 options, it would be terrible to be showing them all in a list like this. Maybe what you prefer to have is a little drop-down box like this. And in HTML, that drop-down box is called a select element. Select element. And it is not an input as such. It is a separate type of tag called select. It has a start and a finish. And inside the select element, there are all of your options. So there's an apple option, a banana option, and an orange option. So each one of these options has a starting tag. It's got the word apple inside, and then it's got a closing tag. So here is my select button. Just the same as the radio button, I can choose one of these options, hit submit, and then fruit equals banana is submitted to the page. Fruit equals apple, and fruit equals orange. All of those are working just fine. Just as with input fields, you can also have values here, which will be used instead of the word apple. So if I have a value of A and a value of B and a value of C, then every time I select one of these options, instead of submitting the word banana, it will submit B, because banana had the value of B. If I select orange, it'll submit C, because orange is full of vitamin C. So that's covered all the new types of input I wanted to have a look at, including these special ones, text area that has a text area tag, and select that has a select tag and option tags. And there is one final extra thing we're going to look at as well, and that is some new types of attributes called Boolean attributes, which means true or false in programming. So far, all of the attributes we've looked at, that's these things, have had equals and some speech marks, and you had to give the attribute a value. So this attribute is called name, and it has a value of fruit. This attribute is called value, and it has a value of 10 com. This attribute is called type, and it has a value of checkbox. But there are some special types of attributes that do not need you to write equals and speech marks, because they're either true or they're false. And here are 3 examples of Boolean attributes that you can use on inputs. The first is one called required, and this is actually in the form submit example. They've written the word required here into the tag. It doesn't have an equal sign like you might expect. It's just the word required. If I try to submit this form without filling in the value, then it fails to submit. It does not let me submit, and it has a message pop up that says, please fill out this field. So required means I must write my favorite fruit. And now I'm allowed to submit the form with fruit equals banana. A second Boolean attribute that we're going to have a look at is disabled. And disabled means that nobody is allowed to edit the value. So what is the best subject? 10 com. Nobody's allowed to say anything different than that. That value, this input here has been disabled. It cannot be used. It has a value of 10 com. You can see it there on the screen, but I'm not allowed to edit it. I can highlight the text. Nothing I type into that box is going to let me change the value. The final one is checked. And unsurprisingly, checked can only be used on radio buttons and checkboxes. Checked means that when you first load the page, this checkbox is already turned on. So most of the time, all of the checkboxes start off. But if there's anything that you want to start on when you load the page, then you do that by giving the input a Boolean attribute of checked. And an example of that is if you were trying to get people to sign up for your newsletter, you'd probably get more sign-ups if the little box was checked when they first loaded the page, because they might forget to have a look at it, or they might just stick with the default. So if you're trying to do something like this, where the default should be, yes, yes, I want that to happen, but you still want to give them the option to turn it off, then you can add the attribute checked. And that says what state the input boxes should start in when you first load the page. So we've covered quite a few different things here. There's 3 new types of input: radio and checkbox. Radio being the round buttons, checkbox being the square ones where you can select multiple. There's hidden, which you can't see at all. There's a text area, and there is a select dropdown. So the select dropdown has a select tag and some option tags. As well as all of that, there are some attributes you can add to your input fields. There, which I can't reach on the screen, but you've seen them already. There was required, disabled, and checked. And those are the 3 different Boolean attributes that you can add into your forms. So that's everything that I wanted to cover for today. It gives you a whole bunch of extra cool things that you can add into those forms that you're making that will submit to your email addresses. And I hope to see you later next week. Goodbye. That's it from me.